You're listening to The Moose and the Loose, your 10 minutes action-packed financial podcast with your host, Mike Yahoo. Hey, what's up, Market Moose? Mike from The Moose on the Loose. I hope you're doing well today. Today we're going a little bit more macro style with an interesting news. That came about like 2 weeks ago. Wasn't a big deal, actually. I just saw flew by, and then I listened to a podcast about that situation, and then I thought, well, maybe we're not done with inflation, and maybe more troubles are coming. And what am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about a potential tariff war with China on both sides of the border, actually, Canada and the US too. So the news was that the federal government will impose a 100% tariff on electric cars coming from China. So I guess that you better start shopping around for your next Tesla and forget about BYD, right? Which ironically, BYD is taking over the EV world as of late. They're selling a lot of cars, mostly outside of North America. So we didn't see that too much. But then again, quite a competitor against Tesla. But besides that, there are a lot of the press, the medias were saying, oh, it's going to be bad for the customers. It's going to be bad for the EVs because then we will all get stuck to pay pricey EVs and not getting those cheap one from China. So is it really bad? Is it really a bad thing to impose those tariffs? And what's happening really here? So the reason why the government wants to impose those tariffs is to actually protect jobs and protect part of the economy, which kind of makes sense if you bear with me for a second. So on one side, if you do that, well, of course, you force people to buy more expensive cars or more expensive goods when you put tariffs because you're protecting your economy, but also means that your manufacturers will sell goods at a higher price than the one coming from China. So not necessarily good for the customer pocket, but the good news is you're going to keep your job, right? The problem here is actually a little bit bigger. And it's because China is not really playing fair these days. So what's happening is to boost their economy, China decided to keep on subsidizing several companies in several different markets. So what they do is they give businesses a lot of money to produce goods at any level. So we're talking about EVs today, but it could be anything else. So those businesses, they are cranking up their production and producing so much goods that, of course, the intern market cannot buy all of that. So China cannot buy all the goods they produce. And their goal is to, of course, give that away outside, so export those goods and sell them to the world. So they are working on overcapacity on purpose, subsidizing the companies to ensure that they keep on producing even more stuff. So the idea here is that those companies are literally dumping their goods at a super cheap price, a price that is not competitive, because we do not do that in North America, for example. So if GM or Ford or Tesla wants to produce EVs, well, the government is not going to pay them to produce those at a cheaper price, right? They're going to produce them. They're going to try to sell them at a profit or at the market value, and there you go. But then imagine that our government would give a huge amount of money to subsidize those production. Well, then we would get to buy cars at a pretty low price, which could be good for our economy, not so good for the government wallets. But then if you dump it elsewhere, it's even worse. So to prevent that and to kind of level up the game for everybody, governments are thinking about imposing tariffs. Again, to protect jobs, to protect the economy overall, but that will also mean that some goods will not be as cheap as expected, so it could put some pressure on inflation going forward. So my friend, we may not get over with inflation. Kind of crazy, right? And I'm not here to play a fearmonger here. I don't really mind about those things in sense of I'm going to keep on investing the same way I do. But I was just interested in seeing the potential impact of what seems to be the beginning of a tariff war, because that is one action. Of course, China is going to retaliate in one way or another. They're going to answer back to that tariff increase, and we're going to see a lot more discussion on the U.S. side. We had a tariff wars a few years ago between U.S. and China. Are we going to see the sequel to this movie? Maybe not. And it's kind of like a very interesting and tough situation to predict moving forward, because they are two major economies, but they're kind of dependent on one another. And of course, there are a lot of semiconductors and a lot of products, like technology products, that are made in China. So that could bring additional issues for companies that are getting stuck between those two countries. So we, on one side, we have that politic aspect, both countries battling with tariffs and stuff, but then you have companies just trying to produce their goods at the cheapest price possible and sell them across the world. So I'm thinking about a company like Apple, for example, that has a huge market in China. What's going to happen with that? Well, that is also something that we'll have to follow. Of course, the election coming up in November will play a big role. We saw how Trump dealt with China back then. Is it going to be the same story? Is Trump going to come back to the office? Is it going to be Harris? How Harris will manage this going forward? That's a lot of question to be with not much any answer. So I will not take any action in regard to my portfolio at this point, but I will certainly follow this situation, mostly because I have a pretty large part of Apple in my portfolio, and that could be one that could be stuck in between those two giants. Another one that could be stuck in my portfolio would be Starbucks, because of course their main growth vectors is in China, so what's going to happen there? But on the end, both countries know very well that they need each other for a lot of economic reasons. So I hope that they will make something right and they will find other solutions. In the meantime, you have to be very careful with a good diversification of your portfolio. I think this is always the solution for most problems, is simply to have this well-diversified portfolio in many sectors and many companies that are not necessarily related to consumer goods or not necessarily affected by tariff wars. And this is how you can navigate through all that noise. So I hope that have helped you a little bit, and I don't want to scare you too much. But yeah, maybe we're not going to be able to buy electric vehicle at a cheap price going forward. We'll see how it's going to develop. All right, Moose, that's enough for today. We're going to talk again tomorrow. Tomorrow, I'm going to talk about my Lira account, celebrating 7 years of investing with an account that I cannot add capital. So I'm going to talk about the most important lesson that I've learned so far managing this account for the past 7 years. All right, take good care and don't forget to stay invested. Hey, welcome to the disclaimer. If you're listening to The Moose and the Loose, you cannot really expect me to give you buy or sell recommendation or financial advice, right? You're here for fun, you're here for information and some entertainment. But I am not your financial advisor, I am not your broker, so therefore I'm not liable if you're losing money after listening to the podcast. If you're looking for some advice, go see a professional. If not, you can enjoy the show and do your due diligence after it.